So it was very interesting, I think, to learn from the people I met, the professionals in Taiwan, but hugely also from the other 5 exchange people from different parts of the world. So there were people from Austria, Germany, Estonia, Sweden, and Australia. And just in the first few days, it was very curious to capture people's perspectives. So I thought there was a great deal of similarity between Taiwan and Scotland in terms of the systems. But for Sweden, this was very, very different. So in Sweden, all social care services are 100% state funded and state delivered, and they're paid for through taxes. So the role of charities like Cargom just was not at all obvious for the Swedish participant. Similarly, for the German participant, in Germany, he explained that NGOs are almost like an extension of the state. They don't really have their own independence to explore, to fill the gaps in society, to be innovative. Contrast that with Australia. And the Australian participant was saying almost all social care is provided in communities through charities or non-governmental organisations. But she also commented that this is almost exclusively through 1-year contracts, and that leads to a huge turnover, a huge rate of change that can be very disruptive in people's lives. And she said it was a real weakness of the Australian system. So it's curious to observe and to discuss these quite different circumstances in Sweden and Germany compared to Australia, and then comparing that to what I know about Scotland and what I was hearing about Taiwan. The other headline that came from Sweden was fika. I'd never heard of this before, but fika is the importance of having a coffee break. Every morning, every afternoon, you must have a coffee break, usually with something to eat, but it's that time together. You would never have fika yourself. It's as a small group, as a small team, to bond, to communicate, to develop your relationship with those that you work with. Fika. Maybe we should think about how we introduce that to Scotland. In Taiwan, it's very traditional to eat together and to live together. So commonly, lots of generations will live in the same house, or certainly in the same neighbourhood. And I was also told that households tend to be very confidential. So what happens in the household stays in the household. So it can be quite unusual for some people to invite others to their home. Given that most people live intergenerationally, I was curious about whether younger people had an ambition to live on their own, to move out, to have their independence. In Scotland, I think that would be quite normal, that people, maybe in their latter teenage years or their 20s, maybe their 30s, would be very keen to have their own space away from their families. But most people I spoke to couldn't almost understand the question. It was almost like a mad question, a crazy question. Why would we do that? And there was one chap I explored it with, he was from a carers association. And he said, why on earth would I spend half of my income on rent? That's just a crazy choice. No one would make that choice. I would far rather have more income and have the flexibility to do what I want to do with that than choose to give up half of my wages for accommodation that would not be as good as I have now. I was very curious. I think it speaks to the cost of living, the cost of accommodation, certainly, in Taipei City, which I understand is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. So I noted that the Taiwanese approach to the clubhouse model was looked upon really quite enviously by my colleagues from Austria and Estonia. Ronnie from Austria felt that Taiwan was more innovative and more aspirational than Austria, with more of an attitude of, what can we do? What can we do next? What can we do that's better? Whereas he felt in Austria the state was really quite static, really quite old-fashioned in some regards. It was curious to hear from Ronnie and his perception of Austria. He felt it was very difficult for Austria to try new things or to embed new approaches or to do anything differently. Kadri from Estonia, she also felt that ideas move very fast in Taiwan and very quickly become reality. She was super impressed with the number of new clubhouses that have opened in Taiwan, whereas Estonia has one. And she was amazed at this a mass increase in the number of community supports for people struggling with mental illness. Interestingly, the people from Taiwan could not always see this. They could not always appreciate the developments their own country was making. That was curious. The role of the family seemed to be a theme that emerged throughout my time in Taiwan. I felt that some Taiwanese were proud of the responsibility that families and communities have, and that the state should have a very limited role in their affairs. Whereas other people felt the state needed to be more involved and contribute more to supporting people to live good lives. I was curious about the apparent individualisation of society, as we perhaps experience increasingly in Scotland. And this was put into sharp relief by my colleague Åsa from Sweden. She explained that Sweden is the most individually focused country in the world. And she contrasted that with Taiwan, and Taiwan being such a family and community-focused country. Åsa felt that Sweden would be better if it could take something from Taiwan. Whereas the Taiwanese professionals were quite happy to confirm that they were often influenced by the Nordic countries and wanted to be more like Sweden. How difficult it can be for us to appreciate our own country's assets, our own country's culture, our own country's way of doing things, and perhaps even to see our systems as other people see them.